And there's also a couple of handouts we'll include in that as well.
So yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to ask any questions. As Dean mentioned, we're going to do our best to answer all of the questions, at least at the end of the webinar. And then those questions we're not able to get to, we are going to reply to those questions and send those out to the entire audience. So we do love questions. Some of the topics that I'm going to share with you today is, first I'm going to discuss the traditional versus centralized models, some of the disadvantages, advantages, and then we're going to slide into a testing center of excellence overview. So just share with you some of the challenges organizations have in implementing a testing center of excellence, the benefits. One of the things I'm going to share with you are some of the statistics showing how many organizations feel it's important that they implement a testing center of excellence. We'll also go over the process to build and implement the tester center of excellence, and I will pay particular attention to the importance of an assessment. I'm just a firm believer that, you know, just like in testing, planning is key. So we're going to talk about that a bit, and then we'll end that up with a Q&A session. But first, I know that we have a poll question for the audience that we'd love you to take.
Thank you, Bob. So yeah, so here's a simple poll question for you. So the question is, does your organization currently have a testing center of excellence implemented? If you're not sure, you get a 50-50 chance of getting it right. These are the kind of questions I wish I had in school. But please do participate. Simple yes or no. We'll just give it a few seconds here. All right, great. Thank you for participating. So it looks quite even. So 46% of you do have a TCoE implemented, and 54% of you do not. So that's interesting. So what do you think about that, Bob?
That is very interesting. I'm excited to hear that so much of the audience does have a testing center of excellence implemented. So, you know, I'd be curious to see if some of their questions center around perhaps revising or modifying their existing testing center of excellence. But very interesting, and I'm glad to hear that so many are looking at implementing a testing center of excellence. So let me chat for just a moment about the traditional silo model, which, you know, I'm sure that those of us that have been in IT for more than 10 years are very familiar with. It's a model where you have separate project testing teams. So every single project has a different team that handles the testing. There are no resources that are focused on the organization. And by organization, I'm talking about the big picture. So, you know, sometimes they just get so intent and so concentrated on that project that it's easy to lose sight of the goals and the objectives of the organization, including obvious things such as profitability. And then, of course, the all-important objective of delivering the highest quality application to market as quickly as you can. And, you know, one of the things with the silo model is because you have the separate teams, you cannot ensure consistent quality. Because for each of those teams, you have different management, and they are all focused on very specific, very particular business units, different projects, and each of those have varying budgets. So because of that varying budgets, that might mean that, you know, one project has the budget to bring on expert contractors, maybe provide additional training to the team, whereas another project might not. Challenges with decentralized testing models today: overwhelming demands. I mean, think about it for just a moment. Look at the new technology and the changing market trends that are occurring today and how quickly they're occurring. Those of us can think back to just 15 or 20 years ago when we had no concerns whatsoever in regard to mobile application testing. we had very few concerns around application security. Everything was focused on network security. So in the decentralized testing model, these overwhelming demands make it very difficult to succeed in such a model. You also tend to have inadequate application quality, and I'm sure I don't need to tell the audience what poor quality can do to our organization. End users, they're much more educated than ever before. They just will not tolerate it. Also, very high production costs and delays in delivery schedules. As I mentioned, you know, it's a primary goal. We want to get the highest quality application to market as quickly as possible. And then a lack of quality standards. So these are all just some of the challenges with having a decentralized testing model. So let's discuss a testing center of excellence for just a moment. So exactly what do I mean by that? So a testing center of excellence, the idea there is you've got a framework comprising strategic assets. And the three primary assets, I'm going to categorize the assets under process, people, and technology. And when you think of people, think of the organization. Your testing center of excellence would typically govern how the testing organization engages and delivers testing services to the larger enterprise. And you've got goals and well-defined processes which are established. You've got a governance mechanism, multidisciplined skill sets, and common tools and technology. And the type of new technology and the marketing trends we've got today, I'm sure everybody has seen it, it's really impossible to do extensive testing, verification, and validation without leading-edge tools in-house. So when you think about the benefits of the testing center of excellence, well, you know, I find it absolutely interesting that our statistic from the poll just a moment ago is the exact statistic that the 2014-2015 World Quality Report shows, in that 54% of IT organizations say they are building or plan to build a testing center of excellence either in-house or through outsourcing. And that is because these organizations understand the benefits of having a testing center of excellence. It's easier for the team to evolve existing testing services. They're much more agile. You've got the same team, the same expertise, and they can offer new services with higher quality. It also promotes a culture of quality throughout the organization. So I would love for everybody in the audience to ask yourselves that. In your organization, do you have a culture of quality? Are your team members passionate about quality, and do they truly understand what it is? I've always viewed it as, and this is old, this is nothing new, but it's a journey. It's not a destination. So quality is something that has to be strived for each and every day. Also, with the testing center of excellence, organizations have found that there's a much shorter time to market. Think about how critical it is that your organization be as competitive as possible today, and part of that competition includes being the first to get their applications, their technology out and available to the market. It also involves decreased and optimized cost, enhanced delivery confidence, and tighter alignment with the business, the organization. As I mentioned earlier, with the silo model, one of the challenges with that is individuals are so focused on the projects that they just don't see the big picture. So with the testing center of excellence, because the center is more tightly aligned with the business, that is something that they consistently keep in mind. So some of the challenges in implementing a testing center of excellence, and I'm sure many of you have dealt with this. I'd be very curious to know if those of you that currently have a testing center of excellence also found these to be true. But obtaining organizational commitment, so buy-in from management. Because we all know, we all realize how difficult it is to get individuals and often organizations to change, to try something new. It also can be a challenge in setting the direction and the priority of not only the implementation, but of those projects that you are going to integrate into the testing center of excellence. So what I mean by that is, yes, the goal is to have your organization fall within this testing center of excellence, but, and we're going to talk about this in just a moment, it's a phased approach, so you can start small. Also, the provision of skills and knowledge. So for those of you that are in hiring positions at your organization, I think you all can relate to how challenging it is to find expert resources out there on the job market. Lack of sufficient information, so that can be summed up in one word, and that's communication. It is critical that the goals of the testing center of testing center of excellence be communicated to the team, that the successes be communicated. That is the best way, by sharing the information, to get your organization, your team motivated about what is happening. Also, the management of existing demands. Because face it, if all of a sudden your organization makes the decision to implement a testing center of excellence, your world is not going to stop. It's not even going to slow down. Most likely, you are going to have the exact same work demands, maybe even more, from day to day. So now you need to figure out, how am I going to juggle all of this? How am I going to juggle my existing demands from day to day while implementing a testing center of excellence? And then also, because a testing center of excellence can take some time, and it is we do recommend a phased approach, one of the challenges sometimes can be just a lack of attention during the end-to-end duration. So sometimes the implementation, those in charge of that, can lose focus. So here's another report provided by the 2014-2015 World Quality Report. So take a look at this for just a moment. It shows that the testing centers of excellence show remarkable growth from 4% with fully operational testing center of excellence in 2011 to 26% in 2014. So that particular chart you'll see right at the top here. So this 4% is from 2011, 2014, 26%. You'll notice that the only one where it decreases slightly is in regard to the plan to develop internally managed testing center of excellence within the next 2 years. So in 2011, it showed 27%, 2014, 24%. Still very, very close, but the reason that that took a dip is because so many of the other categories here significantly increase. So many organizations opt to use a third-party neutral company as a testing center of excellence. And then an in-house testing center of excellence was started within the last 2 years, but not yet fully operational, so it's in process. 2011, 6%, 2014, 15%. And then take a look at this, no plans in place. So when this poll was asked in 2011, 46%, 45, 46% said they had no plans to implement a testing center of excellence, whereas now only 20% indicate that. And in all likelihood, it's because they have a different approach, different methodology in place. And that's not to say that that methodology, that approach is wrong. So some interesting statistics here provided within the World Quality Report. So let's take another poll of the audience.
So the next poll is a little more challenging than the last. So the question is, what do you believe would be your organization's main challenge in implementing TCoE? So this can be from the experience of those of you who currently have a TCoE. Those of you who do not, think ahead and consider what would the challenges be, what would the roadblocks be. So the options are getting executive buy-in and commitment, approval of necessary budget, obtaining expertise and skill sets, in other words, resources, or overcoming organizational politics. So please submit your response, and we'll just give it a few seconds for everyone to have a chance. All right, and the results are in. So the first option, getting executive buy-in and commitment, that's 18%. Approval of necessary budget is a 24% response. Obtaining expertise and skill sets, the resources, is 27%. And overcoming organizational politics, the most tricky one, I would imagine, is 30%. So, Bob, is that what you would expect to see in these results?
You know, to be honest with you, I'm a bit surprised by that. I really thought that perhaps the budget would win out. I'm very pleased to see that getting executive buy-in and commitment is the lowest. So that's great because a lot of organizations consider that to be very challenging. But without a doubt, overcoming organizational politics, it is very challenging because you're talking about changing individuals' thought processes and behavior, and absolutely, I agree with the audience, that can be a real challenge. So interesting. Thank you to the audience for taking that poll. So now let me talk about the process to build a testing center of excellence. So I'm going to talk about a 5-step process. If you do a lot of research, you'll find a lot of organizations will focus more on a 4-step process. The step that I introduce here is actually the first one, conducting a survey. So a survey is just that. I mean, take a look at the landscape, figure out what it is that you have. And I'm going to go over each of these in detail. And then the next step is once you've conducted the survey, you've figured out, okay, here's what I've got at more or less a high level. Then you want to dive deeper and perform a very detailed assessment. And that helps you build the plan, which is absolutely critical. Once you've done that, you're going to design and build your testing center of excellence. And then after that, step 4, you start with a pilot project or projects. So think about the movie, What About Bob? Baby step, baby step. Use a phased approach, pick a pilot project or projects, implement. And then as you're doing that, you start adopting throughout the enterprise. So you'll notice that steps 1 and step 2, we used a pyramid intentionally because we wanted to visually represent that that is where the majority of your effort and time truly should be. If you do the survey and the detailed assessment, which includes just so many factors you're going to have to include in the plan, then steps 3, 4, and 5 will be so much easier. So in conducting a survey, that can be a self-assessment. So every organization can do that on their own. You want to understand, how is your organization ensuring quality today? Focus on the people, on the processes and technology that you have in place and in-house. Clarify and solidify the objectives. So what are the business objectives? What are the IT objectives? What are the testing objectives? Identify all of the stakeholders that have an interest in implementing a testing center of excellence. And that might not be the right word. They might not have an interest. They might be against this thought because they don't want change. But will they be impacted? If so, they're a stakeholder. Identify the budget. And when you think of budget, don't limit yourself to thinking about strictly money. Also think about time and effort. Because remember, we just said a moment ago that one of the challenges in implementing a testing center of excellence is that you still have to address your day-to-day work demands in order to ensure the business succeeds and you're still delivering high-quality applications. Obtain executive management commitment. If you don't have that, if you don't have the budget, then you may end up having to make the decision that a testing center of excellence is not realistic, is not possible for your organization, or maybe it's just not possible at this point in time. But you've got to determine, do the benefits outweigh the disadvantages? Remember, there is a cost to doing nothing. So figure out what that is, and you'll be able to do that by ensuring that you understand the benefits of a testing center of excellence. Also obtain stakeholder commitment. That may be one of the most difficult things to do on this page. You've got to make sure that you sell, that you promote and emphasize to them the benefits not only to the organization, but to them individually. How will it make their lives better? Step 2, perform the assessment. So I'm talking about a detailed assessment here. And a detailed assessment is an analytical process performed to better understand where you are, where you want to get to, how to get there. It's focused on people, processes, environment, solutions, challenges, and objectives. This is something our organization does a great deal because a lot of times organizations ask a neutral third-party firm to come in and do the assessment. By being neutral, it's easier to ask some of the tough questions. And an assessment can certainly be tailored. So perhaps you feel as though your organization has done an excellent job in gathering all of the detail, except perhaps identifying and evaluating the skill sets of your team. So an assessment can certainly be tailored in that you could bring in a third party to do strictly that. And I'm going to be talking about an assessment in much greater detail in just a moment. Step 3, when you design and build the testing center of excellence. So this is where you want to establish some automated business processes. So I'm not talking strictly about test automation here. So I know that we have a lot of folks on the audience that are involved in quality assurance and quality control, but we're talking about automated processes that are put in place. So think about DevOps. Think about processes where once a module or an application is changed, it's almost automated in how the testing center of excellence will pick it up and know that they can start validating that process so that they can then get it into production as quickly as possible. Put in place a leadership structure. So for a leadership structure, you want to make sure that you have an executive sponsor, a steering committee, IT and business subject matter experts, and champions and mentors. And this is not all-inclusive. So you may feel as though it's necessary for your organization to tailor the leadership structure a bit, and that's perfectly fine. Also define processes for continuous improvement. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the term DevOps. We're seeing that become very, very popular, and continuous improvement, continuous integration is critical. With continuous improvement, after you've had a project go through the testing center of excellence, then you want to make sure the lessons learned is done. What did we do right? What do we want to make sure we repeat? And what did we do incorrectly? What could we have done better? And then start establishing best practices, ensuring that they are repeatable. Step 4, start with a pilot project. So it can certainly be more than one. I would recommend at least 3. And you want to prove and succeed. So think about the common engineering term PDCA, that acronym, Plan, Do, Check, Act. So plan on how you're going to drive that project through your testing center of excellence. How is that going to be handled? How is it going to be verified and validated? And then do it. While you're doing it, make sure that you're checking the process, looking for glitches, areas to improve, areas where you're doing it right. Just basically a continual, ongoing lessons learned. And then act upon it. Implement revised processes in order to improve the entire process. And then you want to adopt across the enterprise. So once you've had some successes, start prioritizing your projects in regard as to how you're going to want to implement them into the testing center of excellence. Also, ensure that you've got a process to enforce adherence. If you don't do that, then what you're going to find out is that there are going to be certain teams that will choose to not utilize the testing center of excellence. And then because of that, some teams may find it easier to disregard the process rather than follow it. And before you know it, your testing center of excellence has withered away and gone. Make sure that you communicate the capabilities to all of the projects, all of the teams, the stakeholders, the end users. Get them excited. Make sure that you share your wins. To do that, you've got to measure and track your results. Have the measures, have metrics that will help you do that. Have certain KPIs in place. So that's the 5-step. And then this is a bit of you grab more projects, implement it into the TCoE, and then again and again until before you know it, your entire enterprise is integrated with the testing center of excellence. So let's focus on assessments. So this is definitely a takeaway for the audience. On the assessments, 60% to 70% of the time would be spent on steps 1 and 2. Remember, conducting the survey and performing the detailed assessment. Strategic planning truly does pay off. So I want to focus on the assessments and share with you the granularity and the detail which I would expect in an assessment in order to implement a testing center of excellence. The benefits in an assessment are several. It helps you proactively identify the considerations, challenges, issues. It allows you to be proactive in regard to all of those. It will help identify opportunities for immediate improvement so that you don't get stumbled by any challenges that have existed all along. You then can identify requirements and evaluation criteria, gaps and deficiencies, and the need. So you want to start your development of the TCoE strategy and the implementation plan, and that is something that the assessment, a detailed assessment, will help you do. So the approach in any kind of an assessment, you want to interview as many of those involved with quality assurance and quality control as possible. Explain to them what you're doing and why. You don't want them to get nervous and think that you're doing an assessment in order to be thinking about a reduction in force. Exercise what I call diplomatic assertiveness. So when you ask questions and you're given answers, challenge those answers with more questions. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the 5 whys. And when I say whys, I'm talking about WHY. But that is a common engineering approach where every time somebody answers a question, you ask them, well, why is that the answer? And typically what you find is it uncovers greater detail. Use a structured assessment report format. I'm about to share with you an outline in just a moment. But then you'll see different sections, each with granular recommendations. So a testing center of excellence assessment, some of the focus areas, and this can be used as the table of contents. Start off with the introduction. Second part, create an executive summary report. Executives sometimes may not have the time to read the full report, so the executive summary report, it can be brief, and it just gives them the meat of the report. Then you've got an environment overview. Section 4 would be a quality assurance and quality control team experience, skills, and training evaluation. Section 5, quality assurance and quality control process documentation evaluation. Section 6 focuses on the production and test environments. 7 would be a test design process evaluation. And then we've got a Section 8, which focuses on test automation in regard to the tool experience, the skill, and the training. A test process documentation, test execution process, and metrics. Section 11 focuses on defect reporting and management. Section 12 provides a roadmap and the testing center of excellence implementation strategy. So the entire report leads into Section 12. And Section 12 provides some very clear, specific action items with some target dates to be capped off by a summary. So in Section 1, on the introduction, make it no more than 1 page. Introduce the what, why, who, when, and where. Introduce what is being assessed, the objective of the assessment focused on implementing a testing center of excellence. Share in the report any standards and guidelines you've utilized, the date and the setting of the assessment, assessor and all resources involved, and the format of the assessment. So is it on-site interviews, interviews over the phone? Did you read and thoroughly scan all documentation? Things along that line. The executive summary, detailed outline of the objectives of the assessment, overview of organizational challenges. So why are we doing this? Why are today's objectives not being met? So this helps better explain why the consideration is being made now to implement a testing center of excellence. Share the opportunities for improvement. High-level organizational recommendations and the benefits. So think return on investment. Try to equate that to dollar amounts. So if you can identify the time and effort and the expertise, as well as the risk avoidance, how will it improve your testing processes, thus ensuring that fewer defects are delivered into production? And again, try to relate a dollar amount, a cost to that. An environment overview. So simply put, describe the software testing team, the applications, the technologies of those applications, the software testing tools that you're utilizing. Include the vendors, the type of support that you get, the configuration of those tools. And then also write up any testing methodologies that you've adopted, waterfall, agile, etc. In Section 4, you're going to talk about the quality assurance and quality control team experience and the training that they've received and that they need. What is their testing skill and knowledge? What's the automation, test automation skill and knowledge? So something that we do quite often for many of our clients, Dean himself has significant expertise in test automation, is we will often help them vet potential employees. I've provided numerous questions to ask, if you will, questionnaires that organizations use in their hiring process. What is the team's expertise in functional automation, in manual testing, as well as in test planning and test management? I think everybody can appreciate that in this day and age, we need so much more than simply subject matter experts, meaning those people that are experts in the business. Testing is a science, and in quality assurance, quality control, we need to have those resources, have that expertise. Section 5 covers process documentation. So what kind of process documentation and standards do we have in regard to best practices? Do we have any documentation introducing recommendations on how to improve? And a process might be functional automation, performance automation, application security. It can be documentation on the process for walkthroughs, peer reviews, so any type of verification as well as validation. And then take a hard look at your production and test environment. One of the things to think about is when you implement a testing center of excellence, then if you're going to centralize the team, your test environment could quite possibly have to change. So assess your production and test environment, the best practices, and make some recommendations in regard to how it can become more efficient. When we do assessments, one of the things we would take a hard look at is how is test data managed? And we would make recommendations along that line. Is your test environment truly a 100% duplicate of production? Is it a subset? Does test data have to be scrubbed? So these are just a few of the factors that we would look at. Section 7 would include test design. So how is the integration of automated testers, manual testers, and the business handled? How does this involve the test design? Are tests created with automation in mind? Are there standards? Are there conventions that are followed? We'd look at the existing test cases. I once went into an organization in Louisiana, and they had, and I just looked at one of their projects, which had right around a little over 1,500 test cases. By the time I left 3 weeks later, they were testing the same number of requirements with only 700 test cases. We were able to get rid of a little over 800 test cases because they had so many that were redundant. So one of the things they had failed to do was consistently maintain and manage their test case library. So these are things that we would look at. And this is something that we would document so that the testing center of excellence would pay attention, and possibly, or not possibly, but what they should then do is start focusing on and making sure they pay attention to the test case design that the projects hand over to them. Section 13, we would look at the team automated test execution process and the metrics. So how are automated tests executed? Are they executed unattended? Are they scheduled? So that, perhaps at 9 o'clock at night, that's when I would normally start watching House of Cards. So I want to kick off my test 9 o'clock at night and then come in the next morning and do my analysis. And then we would include any recommendations as well as identify some meaningful measures and metrics that would help us better track the success of our automated test results. When it comes to test automation, it's critical that the organization, that management, feels that there is success in that area in order to ensure the continued investment in test automation. So Dean, you have a significant amount of experience in test automation. Is there anything that you'd look at sharing with the audience?
Absolutely, Bobby. I was just about to interject. Thank you. As you know, I've provided many test automation evaluations in numerous organizations, and most of the pain points we see can be avoided simply by conducting some valuable planning in the beginning. So simply identifying a tool set and a couple resources in-house that know the application, know the company processes, and then build an automation suite from there. That's going to be challenging. There's so much more that goes into the planning for test automation. What methodologies are you going to use? What framework are you going to develop? Do you have the right resources in-house? Would bringing in training and mentoring those existing resources, would that be sufficient, or do you need to bring in additional resources, whether employees or external contractors? So it's very easy to see those companies that have planned well and did their research and due diligence ahead of time compared to those companies who kind of see test automation as a big red button and it's just going to provide all the advantages that automation provides. If not done properly, it can be a painful process, but when done properly, test automation can be a very, very valuable part of your testing center of excellence.
Great points, Dean. Great points. Thank you. Thank you. So in section 9, we would take a look at the test process documentation and actually evaluate the documentation itself. Is it complete? Is it clear? Is that documentation accessible to the entire team? And it's not enough that the team can access the documentation. Do they know how to access it? Do they know how to find it? Do they understand where it is? Is it on SharePoint? Do they know how it's structured and organized so that they can quickly find the documentation? And then when it comes to process documentation, does the team and the organization as a whole, do they adhere to the processes you have documented? Or do they just ignore it? And then our assessment should also include the findings and any recommendations on how to improve. Section 10, test execution process and metrics evaluation. I'm a firm believer that measures and metrics, I've always said they don't answer questions in my opinion, but they help you identify the questions you should be asking. So with the metrics that you have in place, do they provide the type of information that helps you formulate the questions so that accurate decisions and timely decisions can be made? And are they adopted, and does it help change behavior? Do your metrics show accountability, and is there standardization throughout on how various criteria is measured and tracked? So these are just some of the factors that we would look at when assessing the test execution process and metrics. Defect reporting and management evaluation. So what is the reporting and tracking process? What is the remediation process? So it's not enough that you simply report a defect. It's, you know, metrics, I'm a lot less concerned with the number of defects reported, and I'm a lot more concerned with the percentage of defects that get fixed. So what is the fixed rate? How quickly are we doing that? Is our defect reporting and how we manage those defects, is it standardized? Is there traceability? So obviously you should have traceability from the defect in regard to the test which is uncovering that defect. but is that defect also associated back to the requirement which is being validated? When we do an assessment, we ask, can an organization quickly put together a report showing here are critical requirements which have defects associated to them? And in those defects, here are those defects that are critical, high priority, that are still open and have been open for more than 3 days. How quickly can you generate that type of report? And then naturally, I'm sure the audience is aware of the importance of being able to replicate a defect. And something that will help with that information is to have standards in regard to the type of information that is entered by your testers into the defect. And then Section 12, a recommended roadmap and testing center of excellence implementation strategy. So detailed action items include timelines and targets, the milestones, you know, bite it off in bite-sized pieces, if you will. Don't try to tackle the whole elephant. Specified the need, the dependencies, the responsible resources, as I mentioned, the target dates, potential roadblocks. What are some risks in regard to the success of our implementation? And then include any other critical info, such as cost, options, etc. So always have a plan B. And then cap your assessment report off with a summary. So what are the next steps, and then make sure you include information about the author, the contact information, so the questions can be asked. So I hope you found all of this information about an assessment informative, and I truly hope it's something that you can use. Today during the webinar, we've covered the traditional versus centralized models, provided you a testing center of excellence overview, some very specific steps in regard to a process to build a testing center of excellence, the importance of an assessment, and I dove deep into the content of a detailed assessment report. So we do certainly have a few minutes for Q&A. So Dean, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do, Bob, as a matter of fact. A couple great questions. So one of the questions is, you mentioned one of the slides about KPIs. And the question is, what are the success measures for a TCoE organization? What would some of those KPIs be?
So some of the KPIs is, I mentioned just a moment ago about the defect fix rate. I'm going to be taking a look at that. The other thing I would carefully be tracking and coming up with a metric for a KPI is in regard to time to market. With the Testing Center of Excellence, we should absolutely see that decrease. And then we should be able to translate in regard to a KPI, we should see a decrease in the cost of testing, because we would end up over a period of time becoming much more efficient in both manual testing as well as automated testing. So another KPI would be focused on a decrease in the cost of testing. So that's just a few that I would mention, Dean. Great question, though. Thank you.
It was good. There's another one. We do have time. So, so the question is kind of probably focused around managing expectations. So, what would the turnaround time be for establishing a TCoE from the ground up?
So for establishing it, and from beginning to the point of taking on our first pilot project, I would honestly expect that to be 3 to 4 months on average. To have it fully implemented, though, adopted throughout the entire organization, it would not be uncommon for 12 to 18 months to be a realistic time frame.
Would that depend on the size of the organization, structure, things like that? What would impact that time, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great point. It would absolutely depend upon the size, how the team is distributed. So are they, in implementing a testing center of excellence, are they coming over from a siloed model? And are those silos geographically distributed, dispersed throughout the world? So that would be something that might add a little bit of time. As well as, obviously, the number of projects, the different types of technologies that are being utilized. We have clients that are still dealing with mainframe applications as well as mobile applications and client server. So, all of the different technologies, and then with the Internet of Things, which don't get me going on that, but that's expanding the need for technology even further. So those are the types of things where an organization should expect it to take a bit longer to implement a testing center of excellence. But I want to emphasize the phased approach, because using a phased approach allows you to have some wins while the testing center of excellence is being implemented.
Makes complete sense. We have time for another one. So it looks like someone's been doing some research on implementing a TCoE, and the term service utility has come up. They're wondering, what does that mean, service utility?
So service utility that term is utilized to basically identify, when the testing is ready to be handed over to the testing center of excellence, and some organizations even come up with a way to charge, if you will, the project for utilizing the services of the testing center of excellence. So it ends up acting as a central source of services and expertise for the entire organization. So that would give you an idea. And one of the other things with service utilities is many organizations will end up developing their testing center of excellence so that it is also IV&V, so independent verification and validation, so independent from those projects. So when you hear the term service utility, that is the idea there. It can include domain-specific expertise teams, shared service teams for specialized activities. It can be a number of things. I hope that answered the question. That was a great question.
Yeah, that was a good question. And we do have more, but considering time, they're going to take a little longer to answer. So we will include the answers to these questions that we've covered and the other ones that we have pending in an email in the next 2 to 3 weeks to everybody. We'll also include some handouts as well.
Great. And I'd like to thank the audience very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to email us with any questions at all. We'll be more than happy to respond as quickly as we can. Dean and I both travel and do a great deal of speaking, and we still do consulting. But you see our email addresses there on the screen. So again, thank you very much. Hope you had a great time. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a survey at the end of the webinar. Please take the survey. We are always looking on ways to improve our webinars. So this is Bob Cruz. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day all.